Imagine this: Drake, the global superstar, the chart-topping icon. The man who has built an empire worth hundreds of millions suddenly finds himself entangled in a courtroom drama that no one saw coming. Not a rap beef, not a music battle, but a real-life legal showdown with $75,000 on the line at first glance. $75K might seem like pocket change for someone of Drake's status. After all, this is the same man who spends millions on jewelry, luxury cars, and even bets outrageous sums on sports games. But in the eyes of the law, it's not just about money, it's about power, principle, and control. And when the courtroom lights hit, even the world's biggest superstar has to face the judge like any ordinary citizen. What makes this story even crazier is how unpredictable it's become. Just when fans, insiders, and even legal analysts thought they knew where this case was headed, the judge threw down a decision that flipped everything upside down. One ruling, one shocking judgment, completely rewrote the future of this case. And here's where things get interesting. Drake isn't just fighting for $75,000. He's fighting for reputation, influence, and the kind of respect that money can't buy. Every move in this legal chess game is being dissected by the media, fans, and critics. Is this just a minor roadblock in Drake's unstoppable career? Or could this be the crack in the armor that opens the door for bigger problems? Ahead, this isn't just another headline. This is the kind of twist-filled legal drama that feels more like a Hollywood script than reality. Except it's real. It's happening right now. So buckle up, because in this breakdown, we're going to uncover every detail. How this case started, why $75,000 became such a major battleground, what really happened inside the courtroom, and how the judge's shocking ruling could change everything for Drake moving forward. Trust me, by the time we're done, you'll realize this isn't just about one case, one ruling, or even one superstar. This is about the fine line between fame and downfall, and how even the biggest names in the world are never fully untouchable. When you hear the name Drake, you don't think of courtroom battles or legal paperwork. You think of platinum records, sold-out arenas, and a lifestyle dripping with luxury. Drake has been at the top of the music game for over a decade, racking up hit after hit, winning awards, and shaping an entire generation of hip-hop. But in the middle of all that glitter and success, a shadow appeared. A legal battle worth $75,000. Now, at first, this number doesn't sound like something that could shake a man who's worth hundreds of millions. Drake could spend $75,000 on a single chain, a single bet, or even on a birthday party without blinking twice. But that's the thing about lawsuits. They're not really about the money. They're about something much bigger: ego, reputation, and principle. And in the entertainment world, reputation is everything. The roots of this case trace back to a dispute that had been simmering for a while. What began as a disagreement, one of those small issues that could have been solved, quietly behind closed doors somehow spiraled into a public courtroom fight. The details weren't flashy at first. A contract disagreement, a claim about unpaid amounts, and legal filings that most fans would have ignored. But when Drake's name appeared on those papers, everything changed. Suddenly, what might have been a minor issue for anyone else became headline news. Drake sued for $75,000. Read the first wave of reports. And just like that, blogs, gossip sites, and even major outlets jumped on the story. To the outside world, the amount didn't matter. It was the fact that Drake, the Drake, was being pulled into court. Fans were split. Some laughed it off, saying $75,000 was nothing but pocket change for a superstar of his caliber. Others weren't so quick to dismiss it. They pointed out that whenever a celebrity ends up in court, it's never just about the number. A case like this can open doors for bigger claims, expose private information, and even damage relationships behind the scenes. for Drake. This wasn't just about winning or losing $75,000. It was about keeping his image intact. Think about it. Drake isn't just a rapper. He's a brand, a business, a global figure who has built his empire on being untouchable. His lyrics often paint him as a man above the drama, someone in control of his world. But a court summons, a legal dispute that could drag his name into messy headlines. That's the kind of story that chips away at that image. It puts cracks in the armor, and once cracks appear, critics are quick to pounce. In the rap world, where perception is almost as important as talent, those cracks can become dangerous. So Drake did what Drake always does. He fought back. His legal team, one of the sharpest in the business, stepped into the ring ready to dismantle every claim. And that's when the story started to shift. From the moment the case began, the tension was clear. The opposition was determined, armed, with their own arguments and documents. Drake's team, on the other hand, was calm, collected, and ready to strike. For weeks, the case moved through motions, filings, and hearings, each side digging deeper, trying to gain the upper hand. What made this battle fascinating was the contrast. On one side, you had one of the biggest names in music, a man whose influence stretches far beyond the industry. On the other side, you had a claimant who refused to back down, determined to prove their point even if the odds seemed stacked against them. The courtroom became a chessboard, with each move scrutinized, not only by the judge, but by the public. Fans kept refreshing news feeds. Bloggers dissected every document, and even rival rappers watched closely. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a spectacle. As the case unfolded, many assumed it was only a matter of time before Drake crushed the opposition and the whole thing disappeared. After all, how could $75,000 really stand in the way of a superstar? But that's exactly when things took a shocking turn. Because just as the case seemed predictable, just as the outcome appeared written in stone, the judge made a ruling that no one, not even Drake's powerhouse legal team, had fully prepared for. And in that single ruling, the entire case flipped upside down. The courtroom was tense when the ruling came down. For weeks, it had seemed like a routine battle. It's a kind of lawsuit that a celebrity of Drake's stature could easily brush aside. His lawyers had been confident. The public expected him to walk out untouched, and the opposition looked like they were slowly running out of steam. But then the judge leaned forward, read the decision aloud, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Instead of a clean win for Drake, the ruling favored the other side in ways that stunned both the legal teams and the spectators. The judge had not only acknowledged the claim, but opened the door for the possibility of even greater damages if the case continued. What began as a straightforward $75,000 lawsuit suddenly carried the weight of something much larger, a case that could snowball into millions if additional evidence or claims were validated. For Drake, it was more than just a legal complication. It was a blow to the image of invincibility he had carefully maintained for years. The idea that a judge could side against him, even in part, was shocking to his fan base. People were used to seeing Drake win, in music, in business, in life. Seeing him face a courtroom defeat, no matter how technical or temporary, was a reality check that reminded everyone, superstardom doesn't make you untouchable. As soon as the ruling was announced, news spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded across social media. Judge rules against Drake in $75,000 battle. The story went viral, not just because of the dollar amount, but because of the symbolism. Fans debated endlessly, was this just a legal technicality? Or was it a sign that Drake's power was slipping? Behind the scenes, his legal team scrambled. A loss at this stage didn't mean the case was over, but it changed their strategy completely. Instead of aiming for a swift dismissal, they now had to prepare for a prolonged fight. Every detail, Every piece of evidence and every word spoken in the courtroom could now shape the final outcome. It was no longer about brushing off a small claim. It was about defending Drake's empire from potential cracks. The opposition, on the other hand, gained new confidence. Where once they looked outmatched, now they carried momentum. They began speaking more boldly, making statements to the press, framing themselves as the underdog, taking on one of the biggest names in music. Suddenly, the dynamic had flipped. Drake, the giant, was being painted as the one under pressure. For the public, this was theater. Fans refreshed their feeds for updates. Bloggers spun theories about what this meant for Drake's finances, his music, even his personal life. Rivals in the industry watched with interest, some quietly pleased to see him take a hit, others cautious about what the fallout might mean for the culture at large. What no one could deny, though, was the drama. It was almost cinematic, the world's biggest rapper facing off in a courtroom, the stakes rising higher with every passing week, and a judge's decision turning what could have been a footnote into a headline story. And for Drake himself, the wait was real. Money was not the issue. Drake could cover $75,000 100 times over without blinking. What mattered was pride. Losing even a small case was ammunition for critics, for rivals, for anyone looking to question his dominance. In an industry where perception drives power, that mattered more than the cash, the ruling also raised a deeper question. If Drake could lose this, what else could be challenged? Contracts, deals, business arrangements. Suddenly people wondered if more claims might surface. Lawsuits have a way of opening doors, and if one person could take Drake to court and win a judgment, others might feel encouraged to try the same. The judge's words had shifted the narrative, and there was no going back. Drake's team prepared to appeal, determined to turn the tide again, but the damage in the court of public opinion was already spreading. For the first time in years, Drake wasn't the one in control of the story. He wasn't dropping the next hit, setting the next trend, or dictating the headlines. Instead, he was reacting, defending, scrambling to regain balance. And that's where the real twist lay. Because this wasn't just about $75,000, and it wasn't just about one ruling. It was about what it represented. The reminder that even the biggest superstar in the world could be humbled by a decision made in a courtroom. The case was far from over. But this ruling was a turning point. It transformed a minor legal battle into a spectacle, a simple dispute into a story that captured global attention. And as the next phase of the fight loomed, one thing was clear. Drake was facing one of the most unpredictable battles of his career. The moment the judge's ruling hit the press, it was as if a spark had ignited a wildfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere, trending on Twitter, dominating Instagram feeds, plastered across YouTube thumbnails, and dissected in endless TikTok clips. For a superstar who usually controlled his own narrative with precision, Drake was suddenly at the mercy of the internet's imagination. For fans, the ruling was confusing. On one hand, they knew $75,000 was nothing to a man who earned millions in a single show. On the other hand, the symbolism of the loss stung. People weren't talking about the money, they were talking about what it meant. How does Drake, of all people, lose a case like this? Became the central question. Some saw it as a crack in the armor. It's the first visible sign that even the Six God could stumble. Others defended him fiercely, pointing out that legal systems are unpredictable and that one ruling doesn't define the outcome of an entire case. But in the world of headlines, perception often matters more than reality. The story wasn't Drake can appeal. The story was Drake loses. Blogs had a field day. Gossip outlets framed it as a humiliation, suggesting Drake's empire might be shakier than it looked. Serious media outlets treated it like a financial scandal. running think pieces on the pressures of maintaining an empire when legal issues arise. Meanwhile, YouTubers and commentators turned it into content, analyzing documents, speculating about hidden details, and connecting dots that may or may not have existed. Rivals in the music industry couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. A few sly tweets appeared from artists who had clashed with Drake in the past, some subtle, others openly mocking. A single cryptic emoji posted at the right moment sent fans into a frenzy, interpreting it as a jab at Drake's legal misfortune. Even those who said nothing were assumed to be watching closely, waiting to see if the giant would stumble further. For Drake, this was dangerous territory. His career had always been about momentum, about staying ahead of the narrative, but in this moment, he wasn't ahead. He was reacting, trying to hold the ground he had built. Behind closed doors, his team went into damage control, reaching out to media contacts, crafting statements, and reassuring business partners that the case wasn't as serious as it seemed. But perception is a tricky thing to control. Fans were split into camps, arguing online with the kind of intensity usually reserved for album debates. One side believed this was nothing more than a distraction, a minor legal technicality blown out of proportion. The other side believed it was the beginning of something bigger, that if Drake could lose here, maybe more challenges were on the horizon. The noise around the case began to overshadow everything else. Even his music, usually the dominant topic of conversation, took a back seat to the courtroom drama. Interviews and talk shows brought up the case instead of upcoming projects. Sports betting, his usual side hobby that he often shared with fans, was now being used as a comparison point. He loses more money betting than this case is worth, so why is this such a big deal? But that was the irony. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about the principle, about the image, about the way the world saw him. And once the internet framed the story as a loss, it stuck, no matter how loudly his team tried to explain otherwise. The media storm also affected those close to him. Friends, collaborators, and even family found themselves dragged into speculation. People wondered if his business deals might be affected, if partnerships might pause, if associates would start to distance themselves. In reality, many of these theories had little substance, but in the court of public opinion, speculation was as powerful as fact. What made it worse was how quickly the story spun out of control. Every interview clip, every old quote, every minor detail of his past lawsuits was dug up and repackaged. Articles began connecting this $75,000 case to other unrelated situations, painting a picture of a superstar constantly entangled in legal trouble. It didn't matter if the connections were flimsy, they fed the narrative. And the narrative was all that counted. Through it all, Drake kept silent. No posts, no comments, no interviews addressing the ruling. That silence only fueled more speculation. Was he regrouping? Was he angry? Was he preparing a response that would silence everyone? The lack of words became a strategy in itself, but also a risk. Because while silence can be powerful, it can also make people assume the worst. The storm was relentless, and it showed no signs of slowing down. What had started as a minor lawsuit had now turned into a cultural talking point. It wasn't just about Drake anymore, it was about fame, about the justice system, about how quickly a superstar's narrative can shift with a single court ruling. And as the noise grew louder, one thing became clear. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a fight for control of the story, for control of the image, for control of the empire Drake had built so carefully over the years. In the aftermath of the ruling, Drake's camp went into full crisis mode. For outsiders, the courtroom decision looked like a simple setback, but for Drake's inner circle, it was a wake-up call. The judge's words had shifted the narrative, and if they didn't act fast, the story could spin further out of their control. Inside conference rooms tucked away from the public eye, His legal team gathered stacks of documents, dissected every angle of the ruling, and debated strategies late into the night. This was no longer about brushing off a claim. It had turned into a battle for dominance. The $75,000 was irrelevant. What mattered was resetting the balance of power. The lawyers knew the appeal was their first weapon. They prepared paperwork that challenged not only the ruling, but also the foundation of the case itself. Every word of the judge's decision was picked apart, every phrase analyzed for weaknesses that could be exploited. Appeals can be messy, complicated, and drawn out, but Drake had the resources to sustain the fight. He wasn't just playing defense anymore. He was preparing to go on the offensive. Meanwhile, his public relations team crafted a parallel strategy. They understood that the court of law wasn't the only battlefield. The court of public opinion mattered just as much. Statements were carefully drafted, not too defensive, but firm enough to reassure fans and partners. Behind the scenes, phone calls went out to media outlets, encouraging coverage that painted the ruling as just a technical hurdle. A small bump in a larger road, but controlling the story wasn't easy. The narrative of Drake loses had already taken root, and undoing it would take more than press releases. So they looked for a bigger play, shifting attention entirely. Plans for new music announcements, brand collaborations, and even public appearances were suddenly discussed with urgency. If they couldn't erase the ruling, they could drown it out with something louder. Something bigger. Drake himself remained silent publicly, but privately, the frustration was clear. He had built a reputation for being untouchable, for staying above the drama. This case felt like an unnecessary distraction, one that poked at his pride more than his wallet. His silence wasn't just strategy, it was restraint, holding back words that could inflame the situation further. But those closest to him knew he wanted to strike back, not just in the courtroom, but in the culture. At the same time, the opposition's confidence was growing. They began to paint themselves as the righteous underdogs, standing up to power. Small interviews turned into bigger ones, and suddenly, the other side of the case had their own platform. Every soundbite they gave made its way online, often twisted and amplified by blogs. Looking for juicy narratives, Drake's team anticipated this and adjusted their counterattack. They weren't going to let the opposition dominate the airwaves. Unchecked, lawyers drafted stronger filings, making bold claims of their own. PR advisors suggested subtle leaks of information, hints that Drake had stronger evidence than anyone realized. The strategy wasn't just about legal victory. It was about psychological warfare, reminding everyone that Drake still held cards no one else had seen. The appeal filing was the turning point in this phase. Once it hit the court record, media outlets jumped to cover it. Headlines shifted slightly. Drake strikes back in $75,000 legal battle. The story wasn't fully flipped yet, but momentum began to change. Fans who had doubted him suddenly found hope again. They shared clips of his past victories, using them as proof that Drake always came out on top. The opposition now faced its own pressure. The spotlight was heavier on them. They had to prove their case could stand. Against a superstar's legal machine, the cultural side of the counterattack was just as calculated. Rumors spread that Drake was preparing to drop new music, possibly laced with subtle references to the lawsuit. Fans speculated endlessly, dissecting old lyrics for clues. Whether intentional or not, the buzz helped drown out some of the negative noise. Drake's brand was built on moments, and if he could create a new moment, the case could start to fade into the background. But beneath all the strategy and moves, there was still tension. Legal battles are unpredictable, and even with the best lawyers, the risk never fully disappears. For Drake, the fight wasn't over. It was just shifting gears. The ruling had knocked him down, but now he was pushing back harder than ever. The question lingering over everything was simple. Would this counterattack be enough to regain control? Or had the judge's ruling already tilted the balance too far? The answer wouldn't come immediately. Appeals take time, and the cultural narrative doesn't wait. For now, Drake was caught in a race against perception, a battle to prove that his empire remained unshaken, that his crown was still firmly on his head. And as the world watched, waiting for the next twist, one thing became undeniable. This $75,000 case had grown into one of the most talked about battles of his career. A fight that had the potential to leave a mark far deeper than anyone had expected. The courtroom lights dimmed. The chatter of the case slowed, but the echoes of Drake's $75,000 battle still hung in the air. By now, everyone understood this was never about money. It was about reputation, control, and the reminder that even the most powerful can be dragged into unpredictable storms. For Drake, the fight became more than legal paperwork. It became a test of patience, pride, and image. The ruling had stung. The media storm had amplified it. And his counterattack had steadied the ship, but questions still lingered. Could one case truly shake the foundation of an empire built? Over decades, the truth is, empires are not shaken by numbers. They are tested by perception. And perception had already shifted. Fans argued endlessly. Not about contracts or filings, but about what this moment meant for the superstar they idolized. Some saw it as a temporary setback, proof that he was human after all. Others saw it as a signal that bigger storms might be on the horizon. In a culture where one headline can rewrite years of success, I think that uncertainty was enough to keep people glued to the story. Drake himself never publicly broke his silence. He let the lawyers speak, let the paperwork do the talking, and let the music carry the weight. But in his silence was a statement. No matter the ruling, no matter the noise, the sixth god doesn't explain himself to anyone. And in a way, that silence turned into power. It left fans guessing, critics speculating, and rivals uncertain. Sometimes, the less you say, the louder your presence becomes. The case, whether it stretched longer or fizzled quietly, had already made its impact. It reminded the world that fame isn't invincibility, that money doesn't erase accountability, and that even the biggest names walk into a courtroom like anyone else. That reality drew people in because it blurred the line between celebrity and ordinary. For a moment, Drake wasn't just the man on stage or the icon on streaming charts. He was a figure caught in the same messy, unpredictable world as everyone else, and maybe that's why this story captivated millions. Not because of $75,000, but because it showed the cracks in the myth, the humanity in the giant, the uncertainty in someone who seemed to have everything. In that vulnerability, people found something they couldn't stop watching. But here's the twist that most missed. The same way the judge's ruling flipped the case, it also flipped the narrative. What began as a loss slowly became another chapter in the legend. Another story that fans would retell, another debate that would keep his name alive. Another reminder that even when he's down, he never stays there for long. In the end, the drama only added to the myth, and that's what makes Drake different. Wins and losses don't define him the way he transforms them into cultural moments does. The $75,000 battle wasn't the end of anything. It was fuel for the empire, another plotline in a saga that refuses to end. For the fans, the story isn't over. They'll keep waiting for the next headline, the next track, the next subtle lyric that hints at this courtroom drama. And whether he addresses it directly or lets it live as mystery, the truth is simple. Drake stays undefeated in the one arena that matters most, the culture. And if you've been following this journey, watching every twist, every ruling, every media storm, then you know this isn't just about Drake. It's about the way stories like this reveal the hidden battles behind the fame, the struggles that make icons human, and the unpredictable ways a single headline can shift an empire. That's why I had to bring you this breakdown. Because stories like these don't just vanish, they evolve, they grow, they inspire conversation. Long after the courtroom doors close. And if you want more stories like this, more deep dives into the drama behind the headlines, then you're already in the right place. This is Mizteex, where we don't just tell the story, we break it down piece by piece until you see the bigger picture. So if you've been gripped by Drake's $75,000 courtroom twist, trust me, this is just the beginning. Stick around, because the next story we uncover might be even bigger, even wilder, and even more shocking. And remember, the culture never sleeps, and neither do we.